I remember in that moment being like, okay, God, you're not supposed to give ultimatums, but I'm giving you one. Like, you show up now or I'm done, you know? I'm completely done. Because what's the point of believing in you if you're not going to show up in these moments?
Welcome to Voices of Deconversion. We share the inspirational stories of deconversion told by former Christians who are now atheist or agnostic. Our stories remind us we're in it together. They encourage us as we discover who we are and help us to embrace who we become. Now here's Steve with today's guest.
Welcome back for episode 51. This is a conversation that I'm really eager to share with you today. My guest's story is not only inspirational, but by the end of the interview, I really felt like it was such a powerful story. Like many of our stories, it starts in a very fundamentalist, strict Christian upbringing, and by the end of it, we've gone through very difficult things, including some mental health struggles. Many of us have experienced this. It's the process of coming through those difficulties and growing beyond them and finding a new life beyond them that I find to be such a powerful element of today's guest story. She was raised in a conservative Christian home in Texas, and her church had very strict gender roles. She tells a heart-wrenching tale when she was young of feeling like she was being left behind. She thought the rapture had happened, and she laughs about it now, but when she was a young girl, this was something that was very terrifying to her. It just gives you a really good idea of how serious she was taking her faith from a very young age. Now, her story gets really interesting because as she gets into high school, she begins to, she actually calls it, she had her first bout of atheism. And it's really interesting because she kind of goes in and out of atheism. So, very fundamentalist, then into atheism, then she dives right back into a really fundamentalist group. And this is in spite of having kind of more progressive theology at that point. She kind of hides that and dives right into this fundamentalism again. This is when some mental health issues begin to surface, and I just want to put out a trigger warning for anyone listening who might find issues revolving around abuse, emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, or suicide. If those are things that are a trigger for you, we discuss those at about the 50-minute mark, and I would say somewhere around or an hour and 5 minutes to an hour and 10 minutes, that stretch in there. Those issues are discussed. And I just want to give you kind of forewarning before you listen to the episode that those are some of the things that we get into. Now, it's just after a lot of these really big issues begin to surface in a significant way that she turns a corner. And that's the exciting part of her story, and I can't wait to share it with you today. A couple of quick notes. She mentions a book called Leaving the Fold by Marlene Winell. I will leave a link to that book in the show notes. Another thing that we didn't really get a chance to get into was the fact that her husband deconverted about a month after she did. Now, something to keep in mind is that all of this happened about 6 months ago, so it's really, really recent. And I want to just thank Leah for having the courage to talk about all this stuff. She's a regular listener to the podcast, and it means so much to know that the podcast has encouraged her. And again, it's just an incredible story. Here's my conversation with Leah Nitcher. Okay, well, I'm happy to welcome to the Voices of Deconversion podcast, Leah Nitcher. Leah, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, I'm super happy to be here.
Yeah, so you said that you consider yourself an atheist now. Is there a reason you prefer that term to agnostic or another phrase?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just accurately describes the fact that I don't believe in any gods. It is it has that stigma, I think it comes with a lot of negative connotations. So I want to be part of kind of taking away some of those negative connotations from the word atheist and having it be okay and not be scary. And so I do accept that term along with humanist and people person and, all those other more positive ones.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and get into your story a little bit. So you have a very interesting story. It kind of goes in and out of atheism and in and out of Christianity a little bit. So I'm really curious to get into it. So let's start with kind of the early years. How did Christianity influence you in your childhood when you were growing up?
Yeah, man, it really influenced my childhood. It was all over everything. Like, I can't really think back to my childhood without it being just completely colored by my evangelical fundamentalist upbringing. I took it really seriously from a really young age. Like, I think starting at age 4, I have really just a lot of memories that were really intertwined with my faith. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is I was 4 or 5 years old, and I had a dream one night about hell. And I had this dream, you know, I was in heaven, and it was a lot like a church service, which is funny because, like, I don't know, that's what I thought of as heaven when I was that young, I guess.
That's really funny, yeah.
So I'm sitting in the pew, and like I can see Jesus and God at the front. And I remember it was terrifying because he walked down the aisle of the church, came right up to me and was like, "You don't belong here." And I dropped through the floor into hell. I was like 4 or 5 years old, through the floor into hell, and actually, you know, woke up screaming, was terrified. And it just stuck with me. And I remember running in my parents' room and telling them, and instead of comforting me, they were like, "Yeah, that's what's going to happen if you don't accept Jesus."
Wow.
And my parents are good people, you know,
Yeah.
and I think if they, anything other than that, they would have comforted me. But because it was a dream about hell, they were like, "This is an opportunity, you know, to convert her." And so I remember praying with my parents right then to accept Jesus. And it was all fear-based. It was all just terrifying. And I remember this came back to me a couple months ago, like I wanted comfort and got conversion instead, you know?
Yeah. That's a really good, I like the way you put that.
Yeah. I needed humanity. I needed comfort, and I got, you know, converted. And I think the funny thing was that even then, even young, like it didn't stick. I accepted Jesus, you know, thousands of times after that, just out of fear. And just a couple weeks later, I remember kneeling down by the couch with my dad again and accepting Jesus just to make sure, you know, just to,
right.
I don't know.
Yeah, because if this is all real, you want to make sure that you're that you're going to the right place when you die.
Yeah, I really felt that anxiety from a young age, just to be sure. And they supported that. They were like, "Yeah, we'll just do it again. Just say the prayer again." I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, how can I ever feel safe or sure that that everything's going to be okay, you know?"
Yeah, that evangelical upbringing, it really is like constantly thinking about it, constantly worrying, you know, wanting to make sure you're saved, wanting to make sure you're doing what God wants. And I had a dream when I was a child, a recurring dream, and it wasn't anything like yours, but I felt the terror as well, like of in this dream I was in another room, and Satan, who I couldn't see but I knew was there, had basically muted me, like I couldn't talk, but he was getting at me or whatever, I don't know. Right. He was just there, and I was terrified, and I could see my mom in the kitchen, and I couldn't yell for help, and I would have that dream like over and over. So it just, when you said that, it made me think of the dream, but it made me think about how traumatizing it can be to kids.
Yeah.
I mean, to adults, it's like theology. To kids, it's terrifying because it's real.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree, because my parents both became Christians as adults. Neither one of them was really religious growing up. And so I don't think they had any idea what it was like to grow up knowing nothing else. And so, it's completely different when you're indoctrinated into this as a young child. You know, you've never not heard about Jesus. Yeah. So it just feels like this is what the world is. This is reality. And it's so hard to separate those two things out when you've, you know, from day one of being alive, you're dedicated in the church and you're going to learn about Jesus. So.
Yeah, it's everything. Well, take me from kind of from there, and what else stands out to you about your childhood and how religion impacted it?
Yeah, just a lot of fear. I remember learning about the rapture was a big deal for me. So all the Left Behind books and movies started coming out, and that just added to the terror. And just was worried that I would somehow be the only one that was left behind. You know, that all my family, all my friends, everyone else was really a Christian, and that I wasn't, and I was going to get left behind. And there's kind of a funny story. My sister, we were really little. I think I was maybe 8. She was getting ready for a bath one night, and she was running down the hall and like throwing her clothes. And I guess I didn't know that. So I walked out of my room, and I see this trail of clothing, and I lost it. Like, I fell on the ground and started crying. And my mom found me and she was like, what is going on? I was like, oh my gosh, you're still here. You know, like, I was convinced that my family had been raptured and that I was left behind.
That's unbelievable. Wow. That is crazy.
Oh, man.
Oh, that's so horrible, but it's like, it's kind of funny, but it's not. I know it's not funny, like, to that little girl in that moment, but like, it's just like all the movies, like the Left Behind movies, like, there's just a pile of clothes.
Right. Yeah.
Oh no, that must have been so crazy.
Yeah.
Just like, oh no, it happened, you know?
Yeah, like, I really believed it and it was really real to me. And I guess in that moment, it was just like, I don't even know how to describe it. It was just pure terror. It was everything coming crashing down. That was my whole world, you know. And we were supposed to be excited that Jesus was coming back, and I was just terrified, you know. I was just terrified about what that would mean. And I remember being so anxious about, like, am I going to get to be married? Am I going to get to go to college? Am I going to get to have a life? Like, why should I even decide these things or have dreams if the whole goal is to want, you know, Jesus to come back? It really feels like a death cult. Like, you're just kind of like, I'm supposed to want death. I'm supposed to want the world to come to an end. And like, why should I have anything else that I want in life other than Jesus coming back? Because that's supposed to be the pinnacle of, like, happiness and goodness.
Yeah. It's really weird. Yeah. Your focus very much becomes on the afterlife. And yeah, I've heard lots of atheists say things like that. Like, well, if heaven's so great, like, why do you even want to be alive? Kind of a thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's kind of weird. But yeah. Well, so how, as you grew up, how did your faith, develop? You know, I know, like, in high school things change a bit for you, but like up until that point, how did your faith change, or what else stands out to you?
Yeah, it became more personal. So I tried to have, you know, the personal relationship with Jesus. I really tried to read my Bible. I really tried to pray. I really tried to witness to friends, you know, that I didn't think were saved. And even friends that, like, were a different form of Christian that, like, my church, you know, would teach wasn't really Christian. Lots of gatekeeping in Christianity. So, like, I was still scared, but I think I really tried to just focus on doing the things I was supposed to do, to assuage that fear, I guess, and just make it feel a little bit better. Something else that really stands out to me growing up is that, like, there were a ton of gender roles that were really, really preached at our church. It was kind of an independent Bible church. And I remember it really impacted me because there were these things that women were supposed to do and want and be. I didn't feel like I was any of those things. And so from a really young age, I just remember feeling other, feeling outside, feeling like, well, there's something really wrong with me, you know, like, I want to go to college. I want to have a job. I want to see the world. I want to travel. And, like, those things were not acceptable. Like, women wore skirts. They stayed home. They had babies. Like, it was not allowed. There was a lot of I don't know if you know who Bill Gothard is. Do you know that name?
Yeah. Isn't he the, like, Quiverful, or is he just... Okay, because my wife and I, if I don't know if you've heard our stories, but we believed, we didn't know Bill Gothard, but we were in that culture for a couple of years, and that's why our sons are alive, our two boys.
Oh man.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah.
So the church was really invaded with his philosophies, and my parents did not ascribe to, like, Gothardism, but we were just kind of surrounded by it on the fringe of it, and so things kind of seeped in. And I just remember one day, like, telling my dad, like, oh, it'd be really cool to join the military. You know, I'd love to, you know, defend my country. And I mean, I was like 10, and, like, I would never want to do that now. Like, it's just not who I am. But he completely shut it down, was just like, no, that's wrong. It's wrong for females to want to fight in the military. And I just remember being so confused. Like,
why?
Why? Like, give me one reason why. And, like, he was like, well, it's not what God intends. And I was like, why am I less? Like, why am I barred from all these things when my brothers are being told they can be whoever they want to be? They should pursue their dreams. They should go to college. Like, and I was basically told no, and that it was a waste of money for women to go to college because then they're going to have babies and not use their degrees. And I was like, I mean, 8, 9, 10 years old, like that's already being cut off. Like you can't do that.
That's crazy. I've talked to my wife a lot about kind of her experience in the church and stuff, and
Mm.
and to other women about that type of thing. But like the verses that say women should submit to husbands, and I don't permit a woman to teach, and then just the cultural stuff like you talked about. I just can't imagine being shut down like that, or because I mean, obviously I didn't experience that, but that would really crush dreams or really kind of push you down and make you just like, no, okay, I can't do that. I've just got to comply. And especially when you're little.
Yeah. And to have God added into the mix, not just that that's not what your parents want you to do, but that's not what God wants you to do. So
right.
Like if you want those things, like you learn to split from your own desires, you learn to split and mistrust like anything you want, because when you're like, oh, I want to go to college, and you're told that's literally evil, you start to mistrust everything you want and everything you desire and everything you think and hope for. Like you really have to split from those things, because you're like, this is what God wants. He has a plan for me, and my plan isn't as good.
Yeah. I was imagining like when you were talking, like when you were 10 or 8 or whatever, and you were wanting to join the military, it's like you probably just saw something on TV or heard someone talking about how great our military is, and you were probably like, yeah, I want to do that.
Yeah, it was so innocent. It was so just wholesome. I was like, man, I would love to stand up for people. I think that was the feeling I remember having. Like, I would love to fight for something that's worth fighting for. I want to defend the innocent. Like I was, and still am, a fighter. Like I wanted to defend people who couldn't defend themselves. And that was kind of a running theme in my childhood and now my adult years. Like I love standing up for the person that can't stand up for themselves. And so I remember that being the feeling behind it, and having that shut down was really painful too. Like, that there's a part of me that I thought was good, that was unacceptable. So
yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. The next thing that kind of stands out to me is that we had that church, very conservative experience, but we also went to a Christian school. And it was less conservative, still very conservative, but less so than our church. So it was weird because we went to this church where everybody homeschooled, and we were kind of like the bad kids because we went to private Christian school. Yeah. And then
that's crazy. That's crazy. I can't even imagine. Like all the homeschoolers are looking down their noses at you because you're not homeschooling.
Oh yeah, we were the danger zone, the lepers. Like some families wouldn't let their kids like play with us because we went to school.
That's insane.
It was crazy. And then at school, we were like totally the weird kids that went to a super conservative church that couldn't wear what other people wore, listen to what other people listened to, watch the movies. Like we were weird in both camps. And it really got to me because I was like, okay, who's right? Like between the two of you, like who's right? Like I don't fit in anywhere, inside the two Christian circles that I'm in. So it felt like there were too many rules to keep and too many roles to fit into. And I started noticing that from a young age too. I was like, I don't know who's got it right,
Yeah. So is that when doubts started to come in for you? When you started noticing things like that, or?
Yeah, that was kind of the beginning of it. I was just like, okay, so there's not just one way. These people are also Christians, and they're wearing pants, and they're telling their girls that they can go to college. And I guess it was really caused me to be really conflicted. So I started asking a lot of questions, and that was not acceptable in either of those environments. Just saying, like, how do we know we're right? I remember the first thing I asked my dad when I started doubting was, like, how do we know that we're right? And he was like, well, Christianity, like, everyone believes in it. Like, it was kind of a numbers game for him. Like, it's true because a lot of people believe it. And I remember coming back to him and saying, okay, but if I was born in the Middle East, I would be a Muslim. And that's just probably the truth of it. And like, wouldn't you want me to question my beliefs if I was born there? And he didn't really have an answer for me because he was like, but this is what's true. And I was like, well, how is that fair? Like, if you're born into something and you're expected to believe it's true, then how, if I don't question my beliefs, how can I ask other people to question theirs?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Did you ask questions of your parents like very much after that, or did you keep these thoughts to yourself and kind of process it on your own, or?
I went back and forth. There were periods I went through, I questioned everyone constantly, and like, they were annoyed at me, you know, like I was the kid you didn't want in Sunday school because I was like, why? And there was a couple times I actually got asked to leave Sunday school because I would have questions that were just too, like, I guess, disruptive. Like one time they were having us talk about what Jesus might have looked like. I have no idea why we were doing this in Sunday school. They were like, what might Jesus have looked like? And like people were giving interesting descriptions, and I remember my answer, I was like, well, he probably looked like Osama Bin-Laden. And they were like, what?
You couldn't have picked another Middle Eastern person, Leah?
Yeah,
maybe? Yeah.
I don't know.
Had to be Osama.
Right. It was right after 9/11, and like it was fresh on my mind. And I just remember, I think I was in 4th or 5th grade being like, but he's from the Middle East. And so this is probably what he looked like. He probably had a beard. He was probably darker. Like, I just was like, it seemed practical to me. And obviously I was
you're probably right. I mean,
yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I know I was being a little bit like precocious with the way I was saying it, and like I wanted a reaction.
Okay.
And I got it, but like I think I remember them talking to my parents afterwards and being like, she's causing problems, you know? And then talking to my parents on the way home being like, but it's probably true, you know?
Yeah.
And the other thing that happened in Sunday school was like we were talking about a translation issue or a difference between two translations, and somebody like asked the question, they're like, well, what language is the Bible written in? And I remember someone in the class being like, well, English, like it's right here in English, you know?
Yeah.
And I remember looking at them and being like, is that really what you think? Like they didn't speak English. Like this was the Middle East. This was a long time ago. Like this, what?
How old were you when you had that thought?
Man.
About how old? I mean,
I think I was in middle school.
Okay.
You know?
But what's really funny is I don't think I ever questioned what language the Bible's written in until maybe later high school.
Yeah.
I didn't question it.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of people do. You know, it's here in English, and so you don't think about it had to be translated. But I loved languages. I was an English major in college, and so at a young age I was really into language and writing and poetry and literature. And I remember just being dumbfounded, being like, it's so obvious that this was not
like it's
written
in English. Duh.
Yeah, obviously Jesus was a white American, you know, he spoke English, and, you know, I don't know.
It was crazy. Wow.
Yeah, so around the time that I started having all these doubts, I decided to dig in and like get to the roots. So I got really interested in the Jewish roots, and I don't know if you know who Ray Vanderlyn is, but he like leads tours to Israel and just studies like the cultural context. So I got really into that. Just because it did provide some explanation for like the harder things that Jesus said, and, you know, where some of the weird stuff in the Bible was coming from.
Yeah.
I really felt the need to like find explanations for the things that really pricked my conscience, you know, the stuff that in the Bible that we really can't explain. We're like, well, Jesus, like kind of, we're being a jerk right there. Like,
yeah.
So I was really trying to find a way to explain those things. And that was helpful. But I remember, it stopped being helpful the day I was like, okay, wait a minute. Like Jesus and the New Testament writers knew all the Old Testament stuff. So of course they're going to say, you know, he fulfilled all these prophecies. Of course they're going to say he's the right. It stopped helping me, I guess, the deeper I went in. It started to do the opposite, where I was like, oh, it kind of seems like they're really trying to push this picture of him as a Messiah. And like, maybe that's a little too convenient, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so that stopped being helpful. And that was when I think I had my first round of I guess the weird way to say it, but the first bout of atheism. Like I was like, you know, this just doesn't make sense.
That's hilarious. First bout of atheism. Yeah. Yeah. So that's really interesting though, that like you were really digging in, you were really trying to reconcile your faith with these different you know, issues that you were coming across. Yeah. And you were trying to make it make sense. And then the deeper you got, the more it was like, wait a second, like this still doesn't sit right, you know?
Yeah.
When you said you had your first bout of atheism, so would you have called it atheist back then? Would you have thought of yourself as an atheist?
I don't think so. I think I was so in that evangelical world, I didn't really even know what that was. For me, it was just, I had questions, and I think I still would have somehow called myself a Christian, but like if I had really looked at what I believed, I wouldn't have been. I had questions about whether God existed, was Jesus really God? Like, I didn't ascribe to any of those things. So
Okay.
yeah, I don't think I would have said atheist back then, but I definitely was.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you were, it sounds like you weren't like accepting,
No.
yeah, unless you were given proof, because it seems like you kind of walked the path and kind of went through the research,
Yeah.
and just were like, yeah, I don't know that I can believe this. So you were a closeted atheist, though. You kept it to yourself. You didn't want people to know.
Yeah, I didn't want people to know, and that was a really lonely stretch, because my whole life was, church and school, which was a Christian school. Every single person I knew was a believer. I don't think I knew one person that wasn't a Christian. So I didn't even know there was, that world out there, that you could be somebody that wasn't a believer, you know? And anyone maybe on the fringe of my consciousness that wasn't a believer, I was terrified of them,
Yeah, Christianity does a good job of, like, at least evangelical Christianity makes you kind of fear the other people,
Yeah.
Even like you'd said earlier, even other Christians of different denominations, you kind of view them as not Christian enough, or not really saved, or they're doing it wrong or something.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So at this point, you are kind of a closeted atheist, and did that last your entire high school time?
It was kind of patchy. I would say it lasted maybe till like my junior year, and then I kind of came back and started re-engaging with a more like compassionate type of Christianity. The stuff I was raised with was just really fundamentalist, and I decided, that I was going to engage with it again, but only if I could just love every person I came in contact with. Like, I was going to ignore the parts of the Bible that required me to hate people, or to separate myself from people, or to like not accept other people. So like Rob Bell and like Donald Miller and those kind of writers really became my people. And I think I ascribed just to like that Jesus saves us, Yeah. And I really didn't engage a whole lot with the rest of it. I did not believe in the inerrancy of scripture or anything like that. It was just more like, hey, like, I think there might be some truth to this, and I'm going to do the love God and love your neighbor thing. Like, that was literally the extent of it. And I think even then I was still engaging with my fear of like, I just want to be safe, like, I don't want to go to hell. And if this is true, like, I want to make sure I'm in the right camp, but I'm not going to do all this other crazy stuff. I just want to do the loving people part, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's great. I mean, that's like those are the types of Christians that, like, I think are the best, because, they're truly just trying to be good people. And I do think many, maybe most Christians are that way. They're good people just trying to do the right thing. But, and Rob Bell is interesting, because I don't know anything about him other than I know he's a liberal Christian who kind of held those views. He kind of came after my deconversion, so I didn't ever kind of discover him. But so you kind of take this path for a while where you're, I would view that as like a more liberal Christianity.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, more progressive, or so when did that become not enough, or when was that like for you? When were you like, yeah, this doesn't fit anymore?
Yeah. That's more recent, like in college, I didn't really go to church. I met my husband in college, and it was a miracle that I was even in college. Like, that after everything, I had learned growing up, just that I even made it there. But I met my husband there, and we just kind of didn't go to church. And then the last year, no. Okay, so here's how it happened. We graduated. We came up to Fort Worth for him to do an internship, and we went back for him to finish his final year of college. And I was out and working, and I'm working as a teacher at a private Christian school. It was a school it was a school that was for kids who had been involved in trafficking. So I loved the concept of that. They would rescue these kids. They would live on this ranch, and they would go to this school, because for a lot of them it wasn't safe to go back to the places where they had really been.
Yeah.
I had a teacher friend that kept inviting me to a thing called a life group. It was like a small group, home group, that type of thing. And I remember being really resistant to it. I was just like, I've really been hurt by the church. There's a lot of things that have happened. Like, I don't feel accepted as a woman within the church. I don't want to engage with this stuff anymore.
Yeah.
I'm fine just believing and doing what I think is a really good thing where I work, and just going about my life. But she was really awesome, really sweet person. So she just kept inviting me and saying like, hey, it's really important to be in community. Like, I'd love you to just come. So we finally go, not to church, but we go to the life group.
Mm-hmm.
And
it was, at this time, your husband is in a similar place religiously?
Yeah, like, I think he would just describe to like a cultural Christianity, but really kind, really compassionate. We're not interested in doing any of the crazy stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So he's in a similar place, and we go and we leave afterwards, and we're like, I think they might know something about Jesus that we don't know, because they were just a different type of Christian. They were really concerned with, social justice and community and just being kind to people. And I was like, I could maybe, get on board with this. And so we started down that path. A lot of just weird stuff happened. It was a much more charismatic environment. So
interesting.
Healings, prophecy, it all comes into play. And like, we slowly got submerged in that sort of culture, and we became life group leaders. We got discipled. And so we really got pulled in and found ourselves even starting to ascribe to some more conservative stuff again. Like, a lot of charismatic churches, I feel like, have these things kind of undercover. Like, they're much more loving and accepting on the surface, but when you get down to the roots, it's that same story of we don't accept gay people, and we're going to try to change them. And, all that stuff is still there. So we got pulled into that.
Interesting.
And I remember.
So was it attractive to you guys because it was less formal, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Because it was so different from the church environments we had been raised in. We were like, okay, you know what? Maybe we just missed it before. Maybe this is what Christianity is all about. Maybe this is the real deal.
And this is interesting because you guys were more like theologically progressive at that point.
Yeah.
But you were still drawn into a conservative group.
Yeah, it was a conservative group, but I think we were just willing to like keep that quiet for the sake of having a community.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and when they're that welcoming and friendly, and I do remember charismatic churches that I started to get into, it was just all the talk, and this is amongst the youth group because I was young then, but it was all like, it doesn't matter what you wear to church, like, just come as you are, and
right.
And it's like the cool church or something, they would sing contemporary songs, and I mean, it wasn't like my other church, at least for a while. So they kind of have that, but then like you said, then the theology is very similar. It's very much women have their place, being gay is wrong, just all the typical evangelical stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I totally agree. So we got pulled in there, became leaders, and really got pulled in. And I remember they gave us this packet. I kind of freaked out. They gave us a packet when we signed on as leaders to lead a life group. And it had all this stuff, and it was like, you can't watch R-rated movies. You can't drink within the city limits. You can't this and that. And I remember panicking. And I went to the girl that had originally invited me to life group, and I was like, hey, this is where I came from, and I'm not going back there. This is legalism. I'm not signing on to this. I like to have a beer every now and then, I mean, why is the church dictating all this stuff? If it's really come as you are, like, why are there all these rules?
Yeah.
And they were like, and she was basically just gave me the answer, like, we want to be above reproach. And they use that all the time. We want to be above reproach. And so we signed on, and like, I just remember feeling really weird about it. But because these people had really become my friends, they had really become our family, we went for it. And I just remember it never sat well with me. I was like, why do we need these rules? If we have the Holy Spirit, and this is a very like spirit-led, quote unquote spirit-led church, I was like, why do we have to have all the rules still? This seems really similar now to actually where I came from, and I'm getting a little nervous.
Yeah, well, that's must have been a very conflicting, confusing time, because you have these more progressive views, at least buried in there somewhere. You're trying to fit in with this group. They're friendly, they're welcoming, but they're really strict. It's just with like a smile on their face, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It was like dressed up differently, but same stuff, round two.
How was your husband processing all of this? Was he feeling a similar way?
He's so chill. I think he felt a similar way, but he was like, I'll sign the packet and then just do whatever I want. Like I don't think he took it as seriously maybe as I did. And he had come from an environment where that was a really, he didn't have that kind of upbringing. So for him, he was like, I mean, fine, we're only going to be here a year. Like, I'll sign the packet, Okay,
so he was just going with the flow.
Yeah, he's really a go with the flow type of guy, but I don't think he loved it, but he also wasn't like, signing this packet means this is exactly what I'm going to do. Like, he's just a little more flexible,
I'm very envious of people like that, because I wasn't that way. And I would have probably, like you, been like, okay, if I'm going to do this, like, I need to, like, do it right, and I want to please God, so I got to follow all the rules, and that's really funny.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, they don't go through as many traumatic moments like this, I don't think, people who are laid back like that. Just kind of like go with it. So what came next for you guys then?
Yeah, I think the thing that kind of came next was getting into like the prophecy stuff. So I think I started to think that this is what was missing from my upbringing, that like we could hear the voice of God today. And so I started really getting into like, hearing the word of the Lord and like sharing that word with other people. And like, looking back, I'm like, man, it gets so manipulative. I had so many words shared with me that were really just what that person was thinking and wanted me to do, but they would just slap God's name on it. And then you find yourself doing that too, where you're like, is this God? Is this me? Should I give this word to this person? Or like, I don't know.
It's like impossible to know.
Yeah, very confusing. It is impossible to know. And so for me, though, I did find a lot of like life and goodness there, because I was able to pray about things and get what I thought were really positive answers, which now I'm like, that was just my brain being nice to me,
Yeah. Right. Yeah, like you came up with that all by yourself.
Exactly. But I think then I thought it was a new lease on God, a new way to hear him. And maybe he's not as judgmental as I thought before. And so it allowed me to engage with my faith in a more kind way, in a more relevant way. I felt like it was more real, I guess, more personal than what I had grown up with, which was just the Bible, So that really hooked us both in and kept us in when we had problems with other things, just that, that personal connection that you could hear from God. And I think that's kind of what hooked us. But.
And then like how many years were you a part of this group?
So we were part of that group for about a year. And then he graduated and we moved to Fort Worth. And there's a sister church up here. And so of course people at the last church had a ton of anxiety about us moving away and not staying connected.
You're moving outside of the cult.
Yes.
Oh no. Yeah.
Exactly.
You might watch an R-rated movie.
Oh man, we might have a margarita on the weekend.
Yeah, I know.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's funny.
Oh, gosh. And looking back, I see all their anxiety. But at the time, I was like, they're just trying to take care of us. So they were like, check out this church. We know the pastor. We know some people that go there. It's super great. And I felt hesitant. And I didn't really listen to myself. So we went. And we joined another life group. And we're instantly like just as involved there as we were at the past one. It was a quick thing, because a whole bunch of young 20s people had just moved to Fort Worth too, and we were all looking for friends, and so that really quickly became our circle again, and we just started getting pulled in even deeper.
This is what the church does so well, they keep you plugged in, and that if you will go ahead and like follow the rules, they keep you plugged in, and they help you connect, and that's the stuff. Yeah.
And we were lonely. We didn't have family up here, and these were really our only connections. So quickly it became just, where we ran for everything. So it really became like family. And we knew how to play the game. We knew how to be. We knew how, what you could and couldn't say at life group and at church. And pretty soon we got asked to be leaders again. So we did that. And from there, we kind of started moving up the ranks. So we did life group, and then we did this thing called discipleship school, which is a whole nother level of crazy.
It's so interesting to hear the intricacies of these groups, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We kind of started to get into those inner circles. And that's one of the signs of a cult, is that there's things they'll tell you a couple years in when you're in the deep inner circles that they won't tell you on the outside.
Yeah.
Just things they believe or things they ascribe to that maybe would have shocked you at first. So they wait. And then when you're like, really invested, they're like, by the way,
Yeah. By the way, there's this creepy thing that we all do. Yeah.
Exactly. So we're life group leading, slowly more and more of our time spent at the church. We're really, really dedicated to leading, to loving people, to meeting with them when they've got problems, to growing our group. And we both kind of started to lose our identity in this. And like our identity just became that we were life group leaders. And then we decided to do the discipleship school, which is a whole year of once a week after work, you go to a 4-hour class at the church. It meets from like 6 to 10. They bring in speakers from all over the world, like other people within this movement of churches.
Wow.
And it's an intense experience. It's like you're reading books, you're listening to lectures. It's like a college class, essentially. And then, there's a mission trip attached to it. And like the purpose is to it's like the first step in becoming a church planner or a missionary. Like it's doing this discipleship school thing. And you're diving in deep to some theological things, some things that they really want people who are leading in the church to be doing, I guess.
Okay. Interesting. So these groups are connected enough that they have like a training, like where they can invite speakers. So
yes,
this is a bigger group than I imagined. I imagined it was kind of like a small group that, like a home church or something.
Yeah. It's a large group, and they're an aggressive group, and they're planting churches all over the world right now because of this pressurized environment where you get built up as a leader and told you're really good at something and then pushed to the next step. So all of a sudden, we're not just life group leading, we're being told like, the next step is church planting school. And we were both kind of like, I don't know if I want to do that. Especially my husband, he was much more in tune with his desires. He was like, I don't really want to church plant, but I was always susceptible to that pressure. I was always susceptible to, there could be one more thing that God wants me to do. And if I don't do it, I'm outside his will and I'm going to hell, I'm just not having, quote unquote, the best, God's best.
Right.
And so I started really getting sucked into, I need to be a church planner. And at this time, this is kind of where like the mental health part of my story really starts to take the front seat of just anxiety and OCD and depression really start to come in, because I'm feeling all this pressure to do these things and to be these things that if I don't do them, God's not going to be pleased with me. And no matter how many times people tried to say I was doing enough, I never felt that way. There's always one more thing you can do inside the church. And I was always the sucker that was going to be like, oh my gosh, I'll do it, Yeah. One thing that really sticks out to me is that we were checking out at the grocery store, and the checker was tearing up. Like she was obviously having a really bad day. And I was like, hey, are you okay? And she looked up at me and she was like, I don't have a place to live. Like I just got kicked out. I'm homeless. I have nowhere to go. And immediately in my mind, I hear the words of Jesus, what you do to the least of these. And if you saw me without a home or, without clothes, I forget the exact verse, but what you do to them is what you're doing to me. And so what just came out of my mouth was you can come live with us. And my poor husband was like, what? He's with me. And he's like, you just offered this lady a place to stay.
And you don't know her.
We don't know her. And he was, panicking. And then I'm panicking because I'm like, what did I just do? So eventually we talk through it, and she comes and she lives with us for a little while. And it was horrible. I couldn't sleep because I was so nervous. There was a strange person in our house, Wow. She always had weird people coming to pick her up. She smoked. And so the house started to stink, and it was just a mess,
Wow.
And so finally she found another place and she left. But all of our Christian friends told us we were crazy. And it really bothered me because I was like, wait a minute, this is what Jesus says to do. And it seems like the more I follow the words of what Jesus wants me to do, the crazier and more unhinged and less healthy my life gets.
Yeah.
And that started to really get to me. I was like, man, when I do what Jesus said to do, my life doesn't, it seems crazy, you know, and I start to get really anxious, and there's no room for self-care.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
Yeah, yes. I really started to realize, hey, it seems like the people that within Christianity that are really healthy aren't actually doing what Jesus asked people to do, which was to lay down their lives, sell all their possessions, take in anyone who needed a place. Like, this is realistically what he said, and nobody was doing it.
Yeah.
And when I tried, they looked at me like I was crazy. And I was like, but we believe in Jesus, and this is what he said to do.
That drove me crazy as a Christian.
Yes.
It drove us crazy because we just, like, most Christians don't think like that. Most Christians don't think, yes, I should sell all my belongings and follow Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, they don't have the faith that they should to do that. And, you know, of course they shouldn't, because that's a horrible life decision to just get rid of everything you own, just, you know, and then live homeless or something. I don't know. Yeah.
And like, so many of the words of Jesus, now that I know he was like an apocalyptic Jewish teacher that thought the end was coming soon, so many of his words make sense.
Right.
You know?
Yes.
Sell everything you own, and like the kingdom's coming soon. But like when you're just living a normal life, those things don't work.
Oh, man. Upheaval, both physically with your environment and in your mind. It's just this, like, it throws everything up in the air and just makes it unsettled. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And like the other thing that started to happen was we weren't tithing at the time. So we had a lot of school debt. We were really working to get out of it. And like, money is tight for us. It's really tight. Yeah. And they are pressuring us to give in the discipleship school, that like we should be giving generously. They always use the word generously. So above 10%, above 15%, like always increasing, and like that you would choose like a number and just give it no matter what was happening financially that month. And they kept saying things like, when you're a part of like God's bank account, you know, you're never going to go hungry. You're never going to, and it didn't work that way. We would give to the church, and then we would be out of money, because that's how money works.
Yeah.
So that started to happen too. And that felt really abusive. Here we are, a young couple, like struggling to pay off debt, struggling financially. And they're like, hey, just give to the church and it's going to solve all your problems. And it absolutely didn't, you know?
No, it seems like it probably caused more problems.
Oh yeah. We started going into credit card debt because we couldn't keep up, you know? Yeah. So that was just, it was really sad.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I'm breaking down at this point. Like, I'm starting to really experience a ton of anxiety, all this stuff. And then the church decides that they want to hire me. They had a position open up that would have been good for me. And because I was always willing to do anything and was just dedicating my whole life and was really putting everything out there and trying to live the way that Jesus wanted me to live, they thought I was a good candidate. So they hired me. And from there, things just got like worse as far as mental health went. I noticed that like when I was at the church, like I was constantly having panic attacks. I was constantly having a lot of OCD. Like anytime I would be doing something that wasn't related to God, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not pleasing God right now. And it sounds crazy, but that was on a loop in my head just over and over and over again. It's what I thought about all the time. And if I wasn't directly serving God, I was panicking.
Wow.
So I couldn't enjoy little things like coffee with a friend or a walk with my husband or like playing with my dog, like, because that would just come in my head and it was on a loop. And it really started to break me down. Yeah. And I think I'd had that struggle my whole life, but it just really came into focus because this was a really intense season of being like really involved. In church.
So horrible. This is what religion can do to some people. I know most people, or I don't know. I know a lot of people don't have that, but I had really bad cognitive issues when I was in college and I was deconverting and I didn't, God, it was like I couldn't concentrate. I think I was getting pretty depressed and didn't realize it. And it just wreaks havoc on your brain, you know, when you can't live the life you think you should be living. You know, you can't do the things God wants you to do or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
It was just a really intense feeling of like not measuring up. And
Yeah.
so I make it to August of last year and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. Like I'm losing it. I'm so anxious. I have no idea why. I was really disconnected from myself. I couldn't understand like why, if I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do and serving God as much as I can, why do I feel so shitty,
Yeah.
like all the time? And so I had made the decision to go to counseling. And that was a hard decision for me because growing up in the environment I was in, counseling was seen as evil. Like any mental health, psychologist, anything like that was seen as like being tools of Satan, like to pull people away from the church, which is such a dangerous perspective. Like here you're taking the thing that could really help some of these people and you're stigmatizing it even more than it's already stigmatized and making it seem evil. So I was really, really terrified to go to counseling, but I didn't know what else to do,
That's interesting that you knew that was what you had to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It seemed like the last resort. It just felt like my mental health was crumbling. I was starting to have panic attacks. Like we'd get home from church and if I heard like a worship song, like I would lay down on the ground and just start hyperventilating and feeling like I was going to die and my chest is tight. It feels like it's caving in. Like I was having really intense panic attacks connected with these spiritual environments. And like this, not everyone has this, but I took it so seriously. And it was such a big deal to me. I think it really latched to, the mental health issues I was having.
Yeah.
And I couldn't separate those two things. And like, it was like religious trauma syndrome. Like if you know what that is.
A little bit about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely that. So I go to counseling and...
Was this a Christian counselor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Christian counselor at my church, but she's just an incredible person. And I'm still going to her actually because she's able to hold... Like she doesn't agree with everything at the church that we were going to.
Gotcha.
She's just a genuinely awesome person and has been able to totally hold the fact that like I don't believe anymore. And she's walked me through it with a lot of kindness, which I don't think is what most people would experience.
That's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Yes. She's awesome.
That's cool.
So I start going to her and things really start to come out. I start talking to her about my upbringing, my relationship with my parents. There was a lot of emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, some physical abuse. And it finally comes out in a session with her that I was being basically groomed for abuse by a family member. And because he was male, I had nowhere to go because men were always right. And if a man was in leadership or, a Christian, there's no way he would ever do anything to harm somebody. So I was trapped, like as a kid, just trapped. And he lived close to us and had a key to our house because he was a family member.
Wow.
So basically, I lived with a low-grade fear my entire life of this person getting to me. He made key to my house. Like, he could come over whenever he wanted. And just lots of creepy things happening with him. And I was just terrified. My whole childhood, I was just terrified. And it led to my counselor telling me I have complex PTSD because when you live in that fearful environment for that long with no hope of escape, I'm terrified of hell. I'm terrified of this family member that's scaring me, that's grooming me for further sexual abuse.
Yeah.
Man, your whole world is just a terrifying place. And you find these ways to cope. And one of the coping mechanisms is to split from yourself, to dissociate. And I realized I had been living my life in a mildly dissociative state, just really unconnected from my desires, what was healthy for me. And like, all these things swirled together with the messages that Christianity was giving me about denying yourself, taking up your cross and following God. Like, man, it was just a cesspool for me. And so all that comes out and I, for the first time in my life, am dealing with the fact that I was sexually abused physically.
And this was just back in August of 2017?
Well, I started counseling in August. No, I started counseling in November. I knew I needed to go in August because things were coming unhinged.
Yeah.
Started counseling in November. And then this all came out. This is also fresh and recent for me.
Oh my gosh. No, I know. When you
Yeah.
emailed me and you said something like April was kind of a key point
Yeah.
this year, I was like, wow, this is like really recent. Yeah.
Yeah. So all this comes out in April of this past year. Like I get to that point in counseling and the sexual abuse stuff comes out and I break. So it's Easter Sunday. I'm a staff member at this church. I'm there. I'm working Easter Sunday. I'm doing all this stuff. I left and had the biggest panic attack I'd ever had in my life, became suicidal. All this stuff went down. It was really, really hard. And I haven't been back to church since. So that was kind of the cutting off point. I started to realize that all of this stuff was connected to my spiritual life. And I couldn't go back.
Wow.
I realized that the church had like trapped, in my perspective, the church had trapped me. Like this is why I didn't tell anyone, and like it led to all these mental health issues. And I just broke, and I had to quit my job, because I physically couldn't go up to the church building without having these panic attacks. So I had to quit my job, and then was home for like 4 or 5 weeks, just literally unable to move, like on the couch, not really knowing what's going on, like having intensive therapy sessions with my counselor, and I was broken,
Yeah, were you just in like a daze almost from the traumatic experience?
Yeah, it was like all the trauma that I had kind of held at bay my whole life. There was other stuff too, but it just all came crashing down at once. And with CPTSD, it's like you're experiencing it now. Like maybe you didn't experience those emotions then, but now that it's triggered and you're processing it and you're talking about it, it feels like it's happening now. Yeah. It was wild.
That's intense. And it's like you were just, as a child, just holding back this flood of, I hit a lamp, sorry. Okay. And it's really hot. So it's like you were holding back this like flood for years and years, and it's like a dam or something. It just kept building until you couldn't hold it back, and it just hit all at once.
Yeah, I guess I had just thought, okay, you know what? Like, if this is true, if Christianity is true and all this stuff is true, I'm willing to deal with the pain, all the pain that I've gone through to like stay a Christian. And at this point was kind of the turning point where I was like, you know what? I don't know if I'm willing to do this anymore. I don't know if I'm willing to give up all my time and all my mental health and like all these things just to try to stay a Christian. And I just can't do it.
Wow.
So it really broke. And I remember one night during that really difficult period, I became suicidal and I walked into the kitchen. We're going to need like trigger warnings on this episode.
That's
probably.
Fine. Yeah. I'll say something at the beginning. Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you for sharing this, by the way. This is important.
No, I think it needs to be talked about. And so I picked up a knife and I was like, I'm ready to be done. Like, this is too painful. I'm going to hell because I can't bring myself to believe in God anymore. And I'm done. My husband helped me through that, like got it away from me. And I like ran. I remember locking myself in our bathroom and sitting on the floor and just weeping. I'm probably going to cry now, but like, I remember in that moment being like, okay, God, you're not supposed to give ultimatums, but I'm giving you one. Like, you show up now or I'm done, I'm completely done, because what's the point of believing in you if you're not going to show up in these moments, Exactly. And so I remember telling him, like, I'm going to listen, and whatever you say to me now, if you don't show up, I'm done. And it was so eerie because it was the quietest I had ever heard. So silent, And I remember feeling that choice of like, okay, do I have the courage to take this as my answer? Do I have the courage to just say, all right, I'm done. You didn't come. You're not here. You didn't speak to me. And like, we had gotten into all the prophecy and God speaking to us directly and stuff. So I fully expected to hear something. I fully expected him to break through, to show up, to have one of those experiences where God really comes through. And it was so silent. And so in that moment, that's really when I decided, look, I'm done. I'm done for good. And I had been researching, people's weird experiences with Christianity. I've been reading these things kind of as I was going through counseling. and just realizing like there's a lot of shit involved here, and I'm not the only one, and there's a lot of reasons to believe that this isn't true. So when I reached that moment and it was silent, I was done.
That is just unbelievable, and it's so sad to me to think that this controlling version of Christianity, this fundamentalism, it's a lot of it's pretend, like it's not even real, you know?
Yeah.
In our view, God's not there, right?
Yeah.
And yet that pretend thing nearly took your life.
Right.
I mean, that's when it's like, no, it matters. This matters. This is an important issue. It's an important subject.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's so hard because I know there's people out there that can believe and be healthy people. I see it all the time. So many of my friends can believe in God and be healthy people, but I'm not one of them, you know? And I think for so long I tried to be that way.
Yeah.
But I take it too seriously. I'm too black and white, and I'm going to try to be the best version of whatever it is I'm being. And like, as a Christian, man, it led me down a crazy path. So
Yeah. Wow.
yeah, it's true. It's crazy to me that I almost gave up the one thing I think I do have, which is the ability to be alive and to have consciousness and to get to live a life. This led to me almost giving up that. And that terrifies me. And that's why I have such a problem with religion, you know, because it can take people here. It can, like you're saying, like it can make them want to end their life.
Yeah.
And that's horrible.
And we know of, you know, it's more publicized now of all the, you know, the gay children who have taken their lives because of feeling like they weren't accepted. And it extends beyond just those kids. It extends to people like yourself, and it extends to people in all sorts of different situations who, for whatever reason, aren't fitting in or don't kind of blend in with the church culture around them. And yeah, it's terribly sad. And if a God can't, like you say, meet you in those moments,
what's the point?
Like, how powerful is a God if it can't help someone who's hurting? I mean,
exactly.
Isn't that what he's supposed to do? You know,
exactly.
That's supposed to be his specialty. But it's so eerie to hear you talk about the silence of God, because I know throughout my life had moments like that where, you know, you're a kid and you're like, "Are you there, God?" And just silence. Or when I was deconverting, just like these intense questions like, "God, I'm about to like jump off a like proverbial cliff here. I need your help." And
like, this is the time for you to say something.
right. About to do this. Yeah. If you're there, like, come help me. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
that's amazing.
I think people reach that point all the time, but then when the silence is there, we find other ways to explain it. Oh, you know, he knew that wasn't the right time to speak, or he knew that what I needed was to just decide to believe him anyway. You know, those kind of weird.
He's testing your faith. That's why it was silent. Right. And then you just right back into that loop.
Yes, you're right back into that loop. And I think it's just so dangerous. We make so many excuses for God, but really, like, you're suicidal and you're ready to take your life and he doesn't show up. Maybe he doesn't care, you know, or alternately, he's not there.
Yeah.
And so I really reached that point, and like, even afterwards, when I was wrestling with it, you know, is he real? Is he not real? Mm-hmm. I was like, even if he's real, I don't care to know him. And that was a big deal for me because I had dealt with so many abusive people, you know, family members and stuff, and like tried to still have a relationship. And it was a big deal for me to say, you know what, like, it's hurting me too much to try to engage with God. And I've decided that if he's real, he doesn't really like me anyway. So I'm rejecting him even if he's real. Yeah. That was a scary moment as like an atheist to say, like, hey, even if you're there, I think you suck. You know, like, you're not helping people. There's people dying, taking their own lives. There's so much crap in the world, but like, you're just sitting idly by. Yeah. And so that was a big moment for me to realize, like, okay, so maybe even if he is real, I still don't like him. And I still don't want to spend eternity with someone who allows this kind of stuff to go down.
Well, he's in that that version of God is very neglectful and abusive in a neglectful way. Yeah, like an absent parent.
Yes, like a narcissistic sociopath, like psychopath, like and to be expected not only to believe in him but to worship him. I was like, why?
Yeah.
Why? He seems insecure. He seems like all these other men that I had been around that were in the church, like, that were so abusive. I finally was just like, these people, like, God seems a lot like them, and I don't want to be involved. I don't want to allow this to happen to me anymore. Like, I'm done.
Wow, that is such an intense emotional experience, and it
Yes.
happened so fast. And I hate even asking this, but have you had second thoughts? It was really recent. I mean, it was like April when this all happened. So
like 6 months ago.
Yeah. So what have your thoughts been since? How have you processed it since then?
Yeah, wow. I've read a lot. I've researched a lot. I've taken long walks and talked through things with my husband, and like, it was so interesting because the moment that I just said, you know what, I don't believe you're real. I don't think you're there. And if you are, I still don't like you. So much peace came into my life. It's crazy the amount of peace that came in my life when I just stopped trying to figure out what this invisible guy wanted from me, and have a relationship with someone who never spoke. I started to get better the moment I walked away from Christianity. My mental health took an upturn. My counselor was like, hey, we don't need to meet as often. Like, everything got better. My world became peaceful, because I just landed on like, hey, this is all there is. I have choices to make now about my life. I can accomplish things. I can go after my own dreams for the first time in my life. I'm 27 years old, and I've never ever tried to do something for myself, And so, like, that's kind of where my mind went afterwards, is like, okay, it's time to live. It's time to actually stop worrying about what God wants for me, or, what he doesn't want from me, and just figure out, hey, what am I going to do? And my whole life I had wanted to write. And so that's when I started all of poetry. It was because, like, I finally had the time. We weren't leading life group. I wasn't a staff member at the church anymore. And this flood of things that I had wanted to do my whole life started to become accessible. I had the time. I had the mental space. Now that I wasn't worrying so much about God, I could finally engage with self-care. Just learning how to be a healthy human being, and how to have a good life, and how to have good relationships with other people. So I don't know if that really answered the question, but that's kind of where I went.
Yeah, no, that's great. That did. I think that's amazing. It's really cool to hear that, like, you stepped, I don't know, just like stepping away from the craziness, like stepping out. It's like you have the power to step outside that storm and just take a step out, and then outside the storm, things are fine. You don't have to go back to it,
Right. It was self-preservation. And my whole life I had felt that storm of anxiety, of OCD, of depression, of abuse, and kept engaging with it because I thought, my eternal damnation depends on whether I keep engaging with this stuff. And so when I finally decided that I was worth stepping away from it, everything changed. So, and like, I don't want to say like I instantly got better. Like, obviously these things are all still in process, and like depression and anxiety, like, they don't just go away. Like, I started taking medication for the first time because I was like, this is okay. God's not going to heal me because he's not real. So I'm going to try meds. And like, I had been so terrified to try anything like that because I felt like I wasn't having faith,
That's it. It's such a stigma within Christianity to some Christian circles to not use medications, to not go to therapists. But it's a lifesaver, It
is a lifesaver, and it's changed my world. And so, trying medication and just doing what my counselor said, doing self-care, like actually being willing to take care of myself and to give myself space and to not keep pressing into things that were damaging to me made all the difference. So
and that artistic expression through poetry.
Oh yeah, it's been a blast. It's so life-giving. It's so much more life-giving than anything I ever did inside the church that was supposed to be life-giving. Like, this is something I've always wanted to do, and like, I love it.
That's
it's fun.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, this is an interesting question for you. I asked it of someone who had also recently deconverted, but I'm going to ask it anyway, even though it usually applies to people who've kind of been out of it for a while. I'll be interested to hear what you say. So when you think back now on the most Christian version of yourself,
man,
what do you? What, I mean, there were different phases for you.
Oh yeah.
You were very Christian, I think, most of that time. But what do you think about that person now? The really, really hardcore fundamentalist Christian Leah. What do you think of her?
Wow, I have a lot of compassion for her, because I think on the outside she had it all together. She kept getting put in leadership. People came to her for advice, all this stuff, and then she would go home and just crumble. So I think I just feel a lot of compassion for that former version of myself, just that I was trying so hard, but really falling apart on the side the whole time. I feel bad for her. I wish I could go back and be like, hey, it's going to be okay. And like, you don't need to keep doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
It can be a little embarrassing too, just to think about the stuff you used to think or say or do. And I'm just trying really hard to get to a place where I embrace those past versions of myself and realize like, hey, I was doing the best I could with what I knew at the time, and to accept that as a part of myself. Like, I was still me as an evangelical, fundamentalist Christian. But yeah, it can be a little embarrassing sometimes.
So is there anything, it's not been too long for you, but is there anything that I think you named a few things, but is there anything you learned or experienced since you deconverted that you don't think you would have had the opportunity to if you'd stayed a Christian?
Yeah, I feel like the world's really opened up. Like, I have gotten to, I guess reading's a big deal for me. I love information. I love to research. I love just getting to look at the academic world without having to prop up my belief. I get to read any book I want to read. I get to watch any movie I want to watch and just evaluate it based on, is there proof for this or not? Like, I'm not trying to guard that very, very fragile place of belief anymore. I get to just explore whatever it is I want to explore,
Yeah, that's great. That's a good way to put it. You really do have to guard it, when you're a Christian.
Yeah, and the other thing that comes to mind is that I get to love people without any like asterisks, I guess.
Yeah.
I get to just love them. I don't have to have an agenda. When you're a Christian, you literally love people with the agenda of trying to convert them. And like, whether or not people want to admit that, it's true.
Yeah.
And I always hated that. I didn't want to have to tell people they needed to change. I hated anything that kept me from just being able to unabashedly just love other people. Yeah. So now I just feel like those walls are gone. I can be friends with whoever. I don't have to try to change them. I can accept them and just enjoy relationship. That's and cool. Not have these hidden like, but you have to believe in Jesus.
Right. On the third time you invite that couple over for dinner, it's like, have we told you about what makes our lives so wonderful?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking earlier about how, you're keeping up the appearances and just how mental health issues can hide underneath the surface so well. Mm-hmm. And especially people in the church, I think, learn how to put on a facade and really, really just, we have no clue. I mean, even outside the church, what people are dealing with,
Yeah, totally.
They won't let on because it's too painful or too dangerous. If you let on when you're working at a church that you're having doubts and that you're struggling, like your income goes. And so you have to let that pain just get worse and worse. And it's horrible. And it's like torture to have to deal with all that. So it's just a good reminder to me, like, you never know what's happening, even though people look like they have it all together,
Oh yeah, people were shocked. People were shocked when they found out what I was going through. And like, I'm a staff member at the church and like leading life group for 4 years and like discipling people and all this stuff. And so when we came out as atheists, they were like, what? Like, what? When did this start? And I was like, honestly, this stuff has been in me the whole time, but I couldn't hear my own voice until I got into therapy and really started re-engaging with my own voice, my own doubts, my own fears, instead of just, what does God want me to do?
Yeah.
All of a sudden I realized, I was like, that little atheist back in 9th grade was still inside me. She still had all the same questions. She still had all the same issues with Christianity. She still saw all the hypocrisy. Like, I'm just thinking of the times that people like prayed for me and, you know, did the thing where they put a hand on the forehead and like people supposedly fall out in the spirit. Like, I had people push me, you know, and like those were leaders in the church. I'm like, man, I still see all this hypocrisy and all this fakeness, and I don't think it ever really went away. You know, I just learned how to ignore it, I guess.
Wow. Yeah. That's so crazy. Well, yeah, I mean, just like, you're not complying, so just give a little shove, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Just push them over. It's still the Holy Spirit.
Right.
So sketchy. So sketchy.
Exactly. Well, okay, so when you think back then, you know, you went through an incredibly difficult change in your life. And you were just steeped in fundamentalism. And now you consider yourself an atheist, and that's a huge change to go through. But, you know, there's always something really positive about ourselves that we can look back and say, you know, this was always true of me. Even though I went through these big changes, like, this thing was always true of me. What would you say that thing is for you?
That's a good question. I love the truth. I've always loved the truth, and like had this kind of burning passion to go after it no matter what the consequences were. And I can say honestly that I really like that about myself, and that it stayed consistent the whole time. And like there were times I like kind of tried to put away or ignore it, but like overall that thread has been there throughout my life. And I'm proud that I took those steps in those moments where God wasn't showing up, or, you know, something wasn't consistent, or someone was being abused, or I was being abused, that I could take this step to say like, okay, like this isn't true. And now I'm walking away. I'm going to follow through and go after what I think is the truth, even though it's so uncomfortable. Like, I'm working at a church, but now I'm having a lot of doubts that God exists, and I'm going to walk away, even though there's 1,000 consequences. Like, being true to that part of yourself.
True to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, for the person who's listening right now who has also recently deconverted from Christianity, what would you say to them to offer them encouragement or guidance through this?
Yeah, it's going to be okay. Even when it just seems like the darkest, like you're losing everyone, there are other people out there that are going to support you. They may be fewer and farther between. It may be a little harder to find community outside the church, but it is there. And church is not the only place that has a life for you, I guess.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, is there any resource you've found in your process over the last few months that you would recommend for people who are going through a similar thing?
Yeah, I love the book. It's called Leaving the Fold. And it's an excellent book. It's about religious trauma syndrome. So it kind of intertwines mental health and spiritual abuse and all this stuff. And I actually started reading it before I was ready to deconvert.
Oh, wow.
So I thought it was just like a book for people that were struggling, but then she full on is like saying, leave the church, you know? So I put it down and was like panicking, picked it back up after I had that, you know, moment with God where he didn't show up for me. And it's an excellent book. It just addresses a lot of mental health things within the church, a lot of hypocrisy, and like it addresses the emotional side of what deconverting does to you and how hard it is. And it's an excellent book. Super helpful.
That's a great resource.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read that yet, but I want to. That sounds like an excellent book.
It's super good. And then the other thing is Reddit. The ex-Christian subreddit is an excellent place just to talk to other people who've deconverted or who have questions. And obviously this podcast was just a light in the dark for me when I was deconverting, just listening to other people's stories, knowing I wasn't alone, knowing I wasn't the only one that, you know, saw the inconsistencies and chose to leave. And just seeing that people were okay afterwards, you know, their lives didn't end and they're happy, they're okay.
Yeah.
And like, there's life afterwards, you know?
That makes me really happy to hear. That's awesome.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It was super, super helpful.
Because that's kind of the point, you know what I mean? Like, we tell these stories and like, well, what happens when you go through this? Like, for some of us, it's very, very traumatic. And then you think your life's over. You think like, well, where do I go now? But to hear person after person after person just say like, yeah, no, I'm okay. And it opened the world up to me. And now I'm doing this, or I learned this about myself, or I'm healthier now. I mean, it's just so great. It's the opposite of the narrative that the church tells you if you leave.
Oh yeah, they don't address these stories. I don't think I ever knew that the word deconverted existed. They didn't address stories like this. You know, people would kind of leave and fade into the black and you'd be like, what happened to them, you know? And like, that's happening to us now. And like, all kinds of weird stuff's being said about me, like as a staff member. But like, the church, man, they really don't address well, like why people walk away. It's usually like they want to sin, or they, you know, those kind of things. And I'm like, well, what if it's because I take a lot of issues with like how the Bible was put together, like these facts, like, are y'all not going to address like the real reasons that people walk away? Like, obviously my story was intertwined with like a mental breakdown. So they blame that. And I'm like, fair enough. But there was a lot of other stuff going on too. Like I can write out a list 10 feet long of the issues I take with scripture and Jesus and God in general. So
there's plenty of problems with Christianity. You can just pick whatever one makes you happy, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Oh my gosh. Well, is there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about?
Man, touched on a lot. Like, I know there's a lot I didn't say, but I love the threads that we followed. I can't think of anything in particular that we didn't address. Other than maybe like, as we were leaving, I think the one thing that made me really sad, well, there's a lot of things that made me sad. One of the things that made me sad was like, that these people had been our community, you know, for 4 years. And we had said things like, you know, we'll always come after each other. We're always going to support each other. We're always going to be there for each other in hard times. And when I started to go through this, because it was connected with a crisis of faith, nobody was there. You know, I have a couple friends who I love dearly who stuck by me. But for the most part, people had no idea what to do.
Yeah.
And we ended up meeting with our pastor. And he, you know, listened to all of our questions and then basically just kind of said that he didn't have any answers. He was like, I just choose to have faith. And I was like, so I can't choose to have faith. So I guess that's the answer. And I guess it was just kind of unnerving to realize that the person that was leading everything, like, didn't have answers for the things that we were struggling with. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, because they're supposed to have all of the answers. I mean, if God existed, he has the answers for every problem. So when someone runs into one of life's most serious and difficult problems, and common, it's not uncommon for people to go through things like this. If God and the pastor of God's church doesn't know what to do, and God's people don't know what to do to help you,
what's the point?
Like, they're useless, you know?
Yeah.
And I think if religion didn't exist, anyone in that church on a human level could help you, you know. But because the religion kind of skews their view of everything that's happening, they don't know what to do, because there isn't a good answer sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it's something that's not related to religion. You know, it's a mental health crisis, or it's trauma from your past or whatever, and sometimes people need to refer you to therapists or refer you to experts or just be there for you and not try to give you a religious answer, you know? Yeah.
And if there's any other thing, I would just want to talk about like the sunk cost fallacy. Like I was in, like I was so far, you know, inches away from possibly being church planners. Like it was wild. And like, there was this temptation to say, I've put so much of myself into this, you know, I'm 27 years old, and that's not old, but like,
no, I know.
I had poured so much of myself into this that there was a temptation to just keep going, you know, to stick with it because I'd already done so much. And like that decision to walk away can feel like you're throwing away all that time and all that energy and all that, heartache, but better to throw it away than to just keep going and sinking more time, you know?
Right. That was really good. I like that you brought that fallacy up. The cost for you was far too much to keep going, you know?
Right.
Like you were going to lose all you had invested, so to speak, in the church all your life.
Yeah.
But the cost of continuing to invest in it was going to be far more damaging to you. And so, you know, the decision came and you had to make it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a hard thing, but totally worth it. Well,
if anyone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I would say email. My email is lmnitcher@gmail.com.
Okay.
And then also through my poetry page, I love that community. It's become a really safe place for people who are experiencing like trauma and emotional issues within the church. So I love engaging with people through that medium as well. So.
And is that only on Instagram?
It's just Instagram, and it's olive.poetry. It's a fun place. There's a cool little community forming. There's some other people speaking out and doing really neat things just in the evangelical world. So.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome, Leah. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It was very touching and very moving, and it's very inspirational to hear that you have come through all of this. So, I'm really happy that you're sharing it, and I know it's going to help so many people.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. This was really, really awesome.
Thanks for listening to Voices of Deconversion. Be sure to join us next time by subscribing to the podcast. If you'd like to learn more, check out our newsletter at bodpodcast.com.